I thank the Secretary-General for his statement, and I give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine. You have the floor.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation for your decision to chair this very important meeting at ministerial level and for the important role France plays on this Council and in support of efforts for peace in our region. I want also to welcome all ministers who are with us today. Allow me further to thank the Secretary General for not allowing the world to look away or forget Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territory, reminding them of their obligations and for being a strong voice for humanity and peace. I want also to thank him for being with us today and for his statement, along with the statement of his head of the legal department on behalf of the Secretary General yesterday at The Hague before we presented our opinion. Allow me also to convey our utmost respect for the UN and its heroic personnel on the ground who are risking their lives to save lives. The Security Council has adopted binding resolutions with clear goals: stopping the bloodshed, humanitarian aid reaching those who desperately need it, releasing hostages and detainees, preventing forcible displacement and any attempts at annexation, achieving the two-state solution. The world rallied behind these goals, and yet the reality today is a declared punitive siege by Israel over Gaza to deprive 2 million Palestinians, half of them children, of food and water and medicine and electricity, and all other essentials of life while they endure unbearable, inhumane conditions. There is no shortage of bombs falling on Gaza, but there is an imposed shortage of everything else. Starvation as a weapon of war against an entire civilian population that is still being bombarded relentlessly. Families of hostages and detainees are growing more desperate every day. Their plans for forcible displacement and annexations are well underway, and Israeli leaders no longer feel the need to disguise or hide their nefarious intentions. We cannot surrender to this situation. Let me repeat, we cannot surrender to this situation. We must bring it to an end. An immediate ceasefire must be resumed, and all its objectives must be achieved. President Trump, in his latest conversation with the Israeli Prime Minister, stressed what he called, in his own words, the need to be good to Gaza, given how people there are suffering, and signaling specifically that the United States are pushing to secure the entry of food and medicines to Gaza. We deeply hope that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, with the support of the international community as a whole, will be able to secure a return to the ceasefire to start bringing all this suffering to an end. Mr. President, there is a way out of this nightmare for everyone's benefit. President Abbas, in his address to the PLO Central Council, made it clear that we want peace. I repeat, we want peace, not only for ourselves, but for all. That we are committed to the rule of international law and want to see it prevail. that we believe that the peaceful approach is the one that can deliver our people's rights, and that there is no justification for harming civilians, whether Palestinians or Israelis. At the same meeting, the PLO Central Council established the position of Vice President of the PLO and the State of Palestine, held since by Mr. Hussein Sheikh. I was supposed to attend the Central Council in Ramallah. Instead, Israel, after holding me up for 5 hours, denied me entry to my own country that I proudly represent here. I am a Palestinian born in Palestine to Palestinian parents, and I am prohibited from entering my own country. This is a very small part of the collective punishment imposed on all Palestinians and of the denial of our existence and rights as a nation and as individuals. Mr. President, you have on one side a Palestinian leadership committed to nonviolence, and on the other hand, an Israeli leadership unleashing the worst forms of violence against an entire civilian population. You have a Palestinian leadership that is clearly and unequivocally committed to the two-state solution, and an Israeli leadership decided to its destruction. You have a Palestinian leadership that is showing restraint and acting responsibly, and you have an Israeli leadership whose actions are dictated by its populist and fanatical views. You have a Palestinian leadership committed to international law and aligned with the international consensus, and an Israeli leadership that considers that the rules depend on the identity of the victims and the identity of the perpetrators, demanding impunity for its crimes and considering our very existence a crime. You have a Palestinian leadership that has been responsive to the demands for reforms and an Israeli leadership that has flatly rejected change. You have a Palestinian leadership committed to a simple and yet essential idea: live and let live, and an Israeli leadership that believes that the existence of one people requires the destruction of another. The international community has determined a long time ago that there is not a people too many in the Middle East, but an independent state missing, the independent state of Palestine. Mr. President, there are solutions for those not searching for excuses to prolong the war and unbearable human suffering. There are solutions whereby Hamas would no longer rule Gaza, and transitional governance arrangements would set the stage for the PA to fully assume its responsibilities in the Gaza Strip. There are solutions for the reconstruction of the massive destruction Israel has caused in Gaza without displacing its population. There are solutions for ending this illegal occupation and conflict and ushering an era of shared peace, security, and prosperity. In this regard, Arab countries have displayed leadership that has been commended worldwide. Egypt and Qatar mediating the ceasefire. Arab countries taking the lead when it comes to humanitarian aid through Jordan and Egypt. The responsible roles played by Algeria and the United Arab Emirates in this council over the course of the last 2 years. The Arab Reconstruction Plan, endorsed by the OIC and supported by international partners. The leading role of Saudi Arabia and as chair of the Arab Islamic Committee and as co-chair of the Global Alliance with Norway and the EU, and so-called chair of the June Peace Conference with France. International partners have welcomed, have joined, have contributed to, and have helped advance these initiatives, all seeking just and lasting peace. The international mobilization has never been stronger to confront a reality that has never been darker. We see these mobilizations here in the Council, in the General Assembly, at the International Court of Justice, all determined to uphold international law to end this most painful and historic injustice. As we approach the June conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution, we call on all states to do all that they can to uphold international law, support our right to self-determination, and salvage peace. We endorse the call of the Secretary General when he said to all of you and those who are outside this room, this is the time for action, not the reiteration of what we agreed to. This is the time for action. We call on those who have yet to do so to recognize the state of Palestine without any further delay, as a clear signal that they will not tolerate its destruction and the destruction of the two-state solution. We believe, Mr. President, that your country, in this regard, can play a pivotal role. We call on all states to take measures against settlement colonization and against annexation and forcible displacement, and to end Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory in line with the ICJ advisory opinion. We call on all states to support the Palestinian government, which shown clear commitment to reform and peace, and to support politically and financially the Arab Reconstruction Plan, and to continue supporting UNRWA. Mr. President, the Palestinian people are in a cage, killed and starved, day after day after day. As Pope Francis said, this is not war, this is cruelty. Our greatest fear is that the world is growing accustomed to such horrors, that while it condemns Israelis' actions, it feels powerless to stop them. But we ask all countries not to surrender to this self-inflicted powerlessness. Let me repeat. We ask all countries not to surrender to this self-inflicted powerlessness. These atrocities have no moral or legal justifications. This genocide has to end, and life must prevail. The Palestinian people are entitled to international protection for as long as they are trapped under military occupation. A ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which remains the top priority, should also be accompanied by an end of attacks and repression by Israeli occupation forces and settlers across the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which are displacing entire communities. Mr. President, Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered another delusional speech 2 days ago. He insisted once again that the two-state solution meant the destruction of Israel. He said, and I quote, Hamas says we will destroy Israel by terror and military conquest right away, and the PA says, no, you destroy it politically by driving it through propaganda and lawfare to the 67 borders, end of quotation. Pursuing an independent state of Palestine living side by side with Israel in accordance with resolutions of this very council and the very United Nations resolutions in which the state of Israel was established with the partition of Palestine is somehow pursuing the destruction of Israel? Does that make sense? This is nonsense. those who benefited from the privilege of resolutions of the General Assembly, including the partition plan, and admitted as a member state, are saying us seeking peaceful methods to accomplish the establishment of the independence of the state of Palestine is now the destruction of the state of Israel? Who is among you would buy this nonsense? He spoke of the attempts to annihilate Israel when in reality he is the one pursuing the annihilation of Palestine and its people. He spoke of how the Israeli army moves Palestinian civilians out of harm's way when in reality it has shown total disregard for Palestinian lives, killing and maiming and detaining and torturing and starving them endlessly. He bragged about Israel's violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and Syria, which must be rejected by all. He again asserted that he will pursue peace with regional partners while sidelining the Palestine question as if nothing had happened these last 18 months. He spoke with the same arrogance, the same aversion to facts, and the same disregard for the suffering of people, whether Palestinian or Israelis. Fanatical delusions will destroy our region. We need a strong leadership for peace. I repeat, we need a strong leadership for peace. The deployment of collective resolve at an unprecedented scale that will finally deliver freedom for the Palestinian people. Two states living side by side in peace and security, and unleash the true potential of our region for the benefit of all. And we totally agree with you, Mr. Secretary General, when you always say there is no plan B for the two-state solution. We belong resolutely to this camp and count in your collective support to ensure it prevails. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and welcome to the Security Council.
Je remercie l'observateur.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General, Ministers, Excellencies. It is symbolic that this session is taking place on the eve of Israel's Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron. It is the day when we honor the soldiers who gave their lives defending our state and the innocent civilians whose lives were cut short by terror. Israel welcomes what is hopefully to be a broader debate on the Middle East. Far too often, this Council confines its focus to a narrow segment of the region, missing the broader forces at play, both the forces of progress and the forces of destruction. Today we have a chance to widen that lens, and we must. As we speak, the Middle East is in dynamic motion. Danger and opportunity walk side by side. There is much to be hopeful about: economic development, dialogue and collaboration. However, the threats loom imminent, more dangerous than ever. For all the momentum, there are forces seeking to reverse it and take advantage of the instability. And those forces are growing more violent and more entrenched. This is the reality of the Middle East, and we implore the Council and the international community not to ignore or minimize the forces of ruin. This is the reality of terrorism and extremism, of forces present in the Middle East that despise peace and will not rest until their sick version of destruction is fulfilled. There is powerful opportunity in Lebanon today. Public voices, civil society leaders, and elements within its new government are calling for sovereignty, for an end to Hezbollah's tyranny over their country. The Lebanese people have made one thing unmistakably clear: they want peace, stability, and a future free from terror. But Hezbollah, a murderous terrorist organization backed by Iran, continues to hold sway over stockpiles of weapons in civilian areas and is intent on dragging the Lebanese population towards another devastating war. Hezbollah's murderous intent is vividly demonstrated by Hezbollah's ongoing activities. Just 2 days ago, the IDF struck a terrorist infrastructure site in the Dakhia, a Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut, which contained precision missiles intended for use against Israel. The storage of such weaponry within civilian areas constitutes a blatant violation of understandings between Israel and Lebanon and a clear violation of international law. Hezbollah's systematic embedding of missiles amidst the Lebanese population is a cynical exploitation of civilians and another contemptible assault on basic human morality. Prior to the strike, Israel took significant steps to mitigate the risk to uninvolved civilians, including issuing advanced warnings in using precise munitions. Israel will continue to act as necessary to remove threats to its people while taking every possible measure to uphold its obligations under international law. The Lebanese government must have a monopoly on military force. That is the Israeli position. That is the Lebanese position. That is the position of our cessation of hostilities agreement, and it is, of course, the position of this Council per Resolution 1701 and 1559. However, the international support for Lebanese sovereignty and Hezbollah's disarmament must be more than rhetorical. The implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement on the Lebanese side remains partial, with many of the violations reported to the US-led mechanisms remaining unaddressed. The international community must take tangible steps to assist the Lebanese government and armed forces in reclaiming its sovereignty and dismantling Hezbollah's parallel army of terrorists. We cannot waste another decade standing by as Hezbollah regains its strengths and further entrenches itself in Lebanon. Syria today is a country no longer under the Assad regime, but not yet under stable governance. The collapse of the Assad regime created a volatile void. The armed military militias roam unchecked, Iranian-backed forces operate with impunity, radical groups, some aligned with the most brutal global terror networks, control territory and populations. As is too often the case in times of collapse, Syria's most vulnerable, its minorities, its internally displaced, its religious and ethnic communities are the ones left exposed. Christians, Druze, Kurds, Yazidis are all caught between a shattered state and roaming militias. Moreover, we cannot ignore the deeply troubling pattern emerging in Syria, where individuals with jihadist backgrounds have been appointed to key positions within the provisional government and its affiliated armed groups. These individuals, many of whom were previously aligned with terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Jabhat al-Nusra, now hold command over military infrastructure that could be used to destabilize the region and threaten the security of neighboring states, including Israel. These groups' ideologies are clear and cause for serious alarm. This threat was evident last month in the brutal massacre and abuse of Alawite civilians and other vulnerable populations. The Syrian people deserve better. They deserve a future not dominated by sectarianism and foreign interference. They deserve international support that empowers local stability, not the enabling of jihadism and chaos. This Council must recognize the urgency of the situation. Syria must not become a permanently fractured state governed by guns, but by the rule of law. The region cannot afford it, and the Syrian people can no longer endure it. Mr. President, as we look across the region, there is one thread connecting the instability. It is the same thread connected to the Houthi missiles which are relentlessly fired at Israel population centers. It is the same thread connected to Hamas's massacre of our people on October 7th. Iran is not a lowly agitator. It is the engineer of our region's turmoil. Through Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen, Iran has constructed a deliberate network of violence to expand its reach and destabilize its enemies. This is active, ongoing, and strategic. And above all, Iran continues to advance its nuclear ambitions. It issues existential threats openly and regularly. Israel will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. We will not waver. We will not retreat on this issue, and we call on the international community to uphold that red line, because the consequences of a nuclear Iran will not be limited to Israel. They will extend across this region and beyond. The international community can no longer afford to abdicate its responsibility when it comes to Iran. The chaos Tehran has unleashed across the region is a result of years of hesitation and indulgence. Its accelerating nuclear program now poses an even graver threat. It is time to confront the reality that unchecked Iranian aggression will not recede on its own. It must be confronted decisively and collectively. Iran's fingerprints are, of course, on the situation in Gaza, where its proxy Hamas has brought only ruin to its people and terror to ours. I remind the Council that Israel did not seek this war. It was forced upon us on October 7th, when Hamas committed the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Over 1,200 murdered, entire families, babies, children, mothers, grandparents wiped out. 251 hostages were taken into Gaza. Today, 59 of those innocent people remain, with 24 believed to be alive. 35 more are believed to be dead, their bodies still inhumanely held. Hamas has rejected every reasonable offer for their return home. Instead, it releases horrifying footage of hostages to deepen the agony of their families and to prolong their torment. This is sadism. It is psychological warfare in the vilest degree imaginable. Israel has a duty to its people and to the world to dismantle Hamas's military and governing infrastructure, to ensure Gaza can never again be used as a launchpad for atrocities, and first and foremost, to bring our hostages home. However, that duty has never come at the cost of our international obligations. Allow me to remind the Council that Article 70 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions requires aid where the civilian population is not adequately supplied. During the 42-day ceasefire, more than 25,000 aid trucks entered Gaza, facilitated by Israel. These trucks carried tens of thousands of tons of humanitarian aid, including food, fuel, and medical supplies. Israel is closely monitoring the situation and coordinating with relevant UN agencies and humanitarian organizations on the ground. Our assessments indicate there is currently no evidence of a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Further, under Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, a party is not obliged to allow in aid that is likely to support the enemy's military effort. And yet, this is exactly what Hamas has done, stealing aid from the civilian population and selling supplies to rebuild the terror machine. Still, some in the international community continue to draw dangerous false equivalencies, ignoring that Hamas alone began this war, continuing to prolong it, and still holds 59 hostages underground in inhumane conditions. 59 hostages who have never received an ounce of humanitarian aid. As Eli Sharabi recently testified before this Council, he personally witnessed Hamas terrorists bringing UN humanitarian aid into their tunnels where they consumed it themselves, denying even the smallest share to the starving hostages. This war can end tomorrow if Hamas releases the hostages and lays down its weapons. That is the only path to peace. That is why the convening of the high-level international conference on the conflict in June is destined, unfortunately, to fail. Such an initiative is disconnected from the current reality and risks doing more harm than good, particularly in the post-October 7th environment. It creates false expectations while ignoring the underlying dysfunction of the Palestinian Authority, its ongoing support for terrorism via the pay-for-slave program, its refusal to implement long-overdue reforms, its promotion of incitement, and its legal warfare against Israel in international forum. Yet this conference provides fertile ground for yet another opportunity to politicize and polarize international forums, deepening the divide and moving all parties further from peace. Genuine progress will not come from internationalizing the conflict or from one-sided measures decided by uninvolved parties. It will come from responsible leadership, the rejection of terrorism, and embracing the moderate parties. Efforts to promote this conference undermine the path towards real regional progress. Instead of amplifying failed approaches, the international community should focus its energy where it is most needed, confronting the radical axis led by Iran and its terror proxies. Esteemed Council members, there is a danger in mistaking aspiration for reality. This Council must not fall into the trap of wishful thinking. We cannot speak of reconstruction without security. We cannot achieve Lebanese sovereignty while tolerating Hezbollah. We cannot promote regional cooperation while ignoring Iran's nuclear aspirations. And one cannot claim to stand for peace while legitimizing the forces that slaughtered families in their homes. There is tremendous opportunity in the Middle East today, but the greatest threat to that opportunity is terrorism, fanaticism, and an apparent international blindness to them. If we are serious about building a better future for the region, then we must also be serious about naming the obstacles in the way. Israel is ready. We are ready to work with regional partners, ready to deepen cooperation, but we will not compromise on the security of our people. and we will not accept the permanence of terror. This Council has a chance to support progress, to back governments that seek reform, to empower voices that reject extremism, to stand with those who value life and prosperity, not death and misery. It is not too late, but the window will not stay open forever. Through a realistic acceptance of the challenging reality in the Middle East, it might be possible to summon the resolve to harness the potential for an improved future for all. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général,
Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I decided to make the debate on the Middle East a landmark event of the French presidency of the Security Council. The anti-Semitic massacres of the 7th of October 2023 and the military response that ensued have shaken the region. Right now, Gaza is devastated by war. Lebanon is struggling to get back on its feet. Syria is engaging in a fragile and uncertain transition. And Iran is pursuing its dangerous nuclear arms race. This spiral of destabilization must not lead us into a situation from which we cannot turn back. This is why we need to strive together for peace and security for all. Our first priority is to stop the hostilities to bring an end to civilian suffering. In Lebanon, in close cooperation with our American partners, 5 months ago, we managed to achieve a ceasefire agreement. Its implementation still has room for improvement, but it did bring peace. It is crucial for it to be maintained. In Gaza, unfortunately, war continues. The ceasefire being broken and the resumption of Israeli strikes must shock us. They are a dramatic step back for the Palestinian civilians, for Israeli hostages and their families, and for the security of the whole region. There is an urgent need for negotiations to resume and to achieve a lasting ceasefire. We support the mediators' efforts to achieve this. This ceasefire must enable the unconditional and immediate release of all hostages arbitrarily detained by Hamas. I would like, here speaking to this council, to pay particular attention to our compatriot Ofer Calderon, released after 484 days in captivity. I'd also like to pay a tribute to our compatriot Ohad Yaloumi, abducted on the 7th of October, who was arbitrarily detained and then killed in Gaza. He leaves a widow and 3 innocent children behind. The ceasefire should also ensure the mass entry of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The situation on the ground is catastrophic. However, for 2 months now, all humanitarian aid has been blocked. I went to the Egyptian border and I can testify to you with my own eyes that this situation is unacceptable. Since the end of March, the Israeli bombings have killed more than 1,300 people, including numerous civilians, women and children. These strikes have also killed humanitarian workers and UN staff. The living hell that the Gazan civilians are in must stop. I would call upon Israel to lift all restrictions so that humanitarian aid can enter Gaza and in huge volumes. France has fully mobilized to respond to the humanitarian emergency. Since 2023, we've provided 250 million euros in humanitarian aid to civilians. Part of this aid was distributed through UNRWA. France supports its actions, but also supports the reform underway. In close cooperation with our regional partners, in particular Egypt and Jordan, we've also directly provided healthcare, food and shelter for the Gazan inhabitants who are victims of the war. Our second priority is to help the territories terrorized by conflicts to rebuild. The international conference in support of the people and sovereignty of Lebanon that was held in Paris on the 24th of October 2024 collected more than $1 billion. This assistance is for the population and for the security forces. The new authorities have undertaken reforms and reconstruction efforts, and we support this. We will also host in Paris an international conference to support Lebanon's economic recovery. The role of the UN throughout this process of reconstruction is crucial. Lebanon must regain its sovereignty, its complete sovereignty. We would call upon those Israeli forces that are still present to withdraw from Lebanese territory so that the Lebanese armed forces can deploy there once again. It's up to them to ensure the security and sovereignty of the state, assisted by UNIFIL and the oversight mechanism that France is involved in alongside the US, and which includes the UN. France will continue its efforts with determination to ensure the full implementation of Resolution 1701 of this Council. In Syria, a historic transition process has been underway since the toppling of the dictator Bashar al-Assad. France is prepared to lend its support here. Along with its European partners, France initiated the conditional lifting of sanctions. The transition process must be respected and protected, as should all rights of all Syrian men and women, irrespective of their ethnic, religious, or gender affiliation. There should also be the pursuit of effective and decisive fighting terrorism, and I will say this once again from the podium of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The atrocious crimes committed by Bashar al-Assad's regime must not be forgotten. The UN has an important role to play against impunity and to rebuild Syria. In Gaza, we support the efforts of our Arab partners to build a robust and credible framework for the day after. This framework should enable reconstruction, governance, and security in the Strip. However, these efforts can only be effective if they're part of a political solution. This is why our third priority is to work to attain political solutions that can guarantee a just and lasting peace. There's only one solution that can achieve a political settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the two-state solution, the only one that can guarantee peace and security in the long term for Israelis and Palestinians. This solution has currently been undermined by the heightened settlement activity in the West Bank and by violence by extremist settlers and by the desire to weaken the Palestinian Authority and by talk of an annexation and forced population displacement. Given the facts on the ground, the prospect of a Palestinian state, that prospect needs to be protected. That is why, along with Saudi Arabia, France will organize in June here in New York an international conference on the implementation of the two-state solution. Our objective is clear: to make progress on the recognition of Palestine and the normalization of relations with Israel at the same time. This is how we will be able to guarantee Israel's security and its regional integration, whilst responding to the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinians to have their own state. This roadmap for the effective implementation of the two-state solution also involves disarming Hamas, defining a credible government structure from which it will be excluded, and the reform of the Palestinian Authority. The UN and its agencies must play their full role in this process. In parallel, we spare no effort to find a diplomatic solution to the challenge of the relentless pursuit of the Iranian nuclear program. The director of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, described this very clearly yesterday during our meeting on non-proliferation. Given destabilizing interference from outside, we will continue to strive to strengthen the sovereignty of the states of the region. I have just returned from a trip to Iraq, and I'd like to underscore how this country paves the way. Torn apart not long ago by conflict and power games, today it's managing to keep to the side of regional tensions. Iraq has regained its role as a center of equilibrium and stability. The third conference of Baghdad that will take place at the end of the year attests to this. It will enable us to work on cooperation and regional security, counteracting the logic of fragmentation and confrontation that is at play today. Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, France seeks to serve peace and sovereignty, without which nothing is possible. We are firmly committed through our history and our geography to the Near and Middle East. Today, our security and our stability all depend on this region, that of all of us. We are therefore determined to pave with you, for you, the path of peace. I now resume my functions as President of the Council, and I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alaji Timothy Musa Kaba, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone. You have the floor.
I thank Mr. President, Excellency Mr. Jean-Noël Barrot, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. I thank you for convening this important ministerial level debate. And I also thank the Secretary General for his briefing and unwavering leadership in seeking peace in the Middle East under deeply challenging conditions. This meeting comes at a moment of grave urgency. The prolonged Israel-Palestine conflict continues to inflict devastating humanitarian, security, and political consequences, destabilizing the region and challenging the collective conscience of the international community. The recent and continued violations of ceasefire agreement have worsened an already catastrophic humanitarian situation. In the Gaza Strip and West Bank, we are witnessing an alarming deterioration characterized by mass civilian casualties, repeated displacement, and widespread destruction of infrastructure, an affront to international humanitarian law and the rules-based international system. Reports indicate that 1,890 people were killed between 18 March and 17 April, including 595 children. Indiscriminate airstrikes on densely populated areas and IDP camps have resulted in appalling civilian casualties. The use of incendiary weapons in these attacks has left women and children burnt alive in their shelters, deepening trauma and collective despair. Repeated evacuation orders have displaced over 480,000 people within a matter of weeks. The total blockade of humanitarian aid and commercial goods since 2nd March 2025 is a man-made catastrophe. Despite the presence of food convoys by UNRWA and the World Food Programme WFP, access remains blocked. WFP's recent warning of depleted food reserves and the possible suspension of operations is a dire signal. Medical facilities already overburdened and under-equipped face collapse. Fuel, medicine, clean water, and electricity are almost non-existent. Humanitarian personnel operate under immense risk. Dozens have been killed, while UNRWA, a lifeline for millions of Palestinians, faces obstruction, politicization, and underfunding. The legal obligations of the occupying power are clear under the 4th Geneva Convention. Israel, as the occupying power, is bound to ensure the welfare of civilians in the occupied Palestinian territory, including access to food, water, shelter, and medical care. These obligations are not discretionary. In this regard, Sierra Leone strongly supports the submission of the United Nations to the International Court of Justice, which reaffirmed Israel's continuing legal obligations toward the United Nations, UNRWA, and the people under occupation. The UN's legal position is unambiguous. Israel cannot derogate from its responsibilities under international law and must allow unhindered humanitarian access. Mr. President, the situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is equally concerning. Settlement expansion, the demolition of homes, and restrictions of Palestinian movement continue to intensify. Thousands remain displaced in Jenin, Tulkarm, and other communities. These actions risk undermining the path toward a two-state solution and must cease. Sierra Leone underscores the urgent need for accountability and compliance with international humanitarian law. Despite the non-convening of a conference of high contracting parties to the 4th Geneva Convention with the aim of reaffirming legal protections, accessing compliance, and advancing mechanisms for accountability, Sierra Leone continues to urge for compliance with IHL and a constant reaffirmation of its principles. As a country that emerged from conflict through multilateral solidarity and principled diplomacy over 2 decades, Sierra Leone believes in peace through lawful and negotiated settlement, not through violence or collective punishment. In this regard, we emphasize the following priorities. First, improving the security situation. We unequivocally condemn the targeting of civilians, hostage-taking, and all forms of attacks on non-combatants. We reiterated our call for the immediate and unconditional release of the remaining 59 Israeli hostages held by Hamas and urged all parties to commit to a renewed cessation of hostilities. Security Council Resolution 2735/2024 provides a foundation for dialogue. Second, ensuring humanitarian access. Humanitarian assistance must not be politicized or weaponized. We call for the safe, sustained, and unimpeded access for aid agencies across all border entry points into Gaza, including the Rafah, Kerem Shalom, and Erez crossings. We reject restrictions placed on UNRWA and other aid organizations and support full resumption of their work. The international community must urgently act to avert a famine and allow the continuation of critical health interventions, such as the forthcoming round of polio vaccinations. Third, Mr. President, supporting a renewed peace process. The current cycle of violence and once again proves that occupation, blockade, and unilateral actions cannot form the basis for peace. We welcome the initiative by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to co-chair an international conference on the Middle East peace process and call on all parties to approach the process in good faith. This effort must be anchored in international law, relevant UN resolutions, and long-standing frameworks such as the Arab Peace Initiative and the Quartet Principles. Sierra Leone continues to support the internationally endorsed vision of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, with East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state, and a return to the 1967 borders. We reaffirm our call for the full implementation of all relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, and we encourage intensified diplomatic engagement by regional and international actors. In closing, Mr. President, Sierra Leone joins others in renewing our collective call for peace, justice, and accountability. The road to peace must be paved with respect for international law, humanitarian principles, and the inherent dignity of every human being in the region, in particularly the people of Israel and Palestine. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kaba for his statement, and I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Barbara Zvokelj, Secretary General, Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of Slovenia.
I thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everyone. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you, Secretary General, on behalf of my government, for the service of each and every UN staff member on the ground. Mr. President, 7th October was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. And what followed are the deadliest 570 days ever for Palestinians. We have never seen such a perpetuating trauma for people on the ground, nor an obliteration of the system we had built to prevent it. Mr. President, never has humanity been more suffocated. From attacks on humanitarian, medical, and media workers, to attacks on civilians and destruction of civilian objects and humanitarian facilities in Gaza. From the longest blockade of humanitarian aid since the start of the war, now passing 50 days, to plans for militarization of aid. From limiting access of humanitarian workers to downright attempts to dismantle a UN agency, to legally prosecute it and discredit the entire organization. From killing civilians just because they are of certain ethnic background, to taking others for hostage for the same reason. The list of the unacceptable is long, and it prevents us from shielding civilians from a war which they bear no responsibility for. We again call for full respect of international law, including international humanitarian and human rights law. Mr. President, never has the future of the region seemed so profoundly uncertain. To use the words of Gazan photographer Fatima Haswana, tragically killed earlier this month, every death will have an impact that will remain through time. There is no military solution to the Palestinian question. War in Gaza does not bring more security to Israel. Operations in the West Bank and persistent illegal occupation and settlement expansion are shaking up the entire region. Attacks across the region, including on the south of Syria, along with inflammatory political narratives, are stoking global instability. As a diplomat, I fear what could come out of the ashes of the Gaza war if there is no united front from the international community to prevent more violence, more hatred, and more radicalism. As a mother, I wonder what kind of future awaits those children in Palestine who have lost their entire families, or those children in Israel whose relatives are still held hostage or will never come home. The road to their recovery is long. It is our responsibility to pave it with peace. Mr. President, never have needed more strength to prevent the evaporation of a political solution and to defend the system we have collectively built. Slovenia has long been a staunch supporter of the two-state solution. Last June, we recognized the state of Palestine. Since October 2023, we have been providing humanitarian aid to address the needs of civilian population in Gaza. For almost 15 years, we have been carrying out the medical rehabilitation of wounded Palestinian children in Slovenia. We will continue speaking in favor of Israel's security, as well as in support of the work of the Palestine Authority, including in their reform path. We stand against any territorial or demographic change of Palestine. Slovenia supports the ongoing discussions around the comprehensive Gaza reconstruction plan, highlighting the crucial role of strong Arab and Palestinian ownership. We will continue supporting political and legal processes. Everyone should play their part, including through tangible commitments and actions at the International Conference on the Two-State Solution this June that you just mentioned, Mr. President. As we look to the future, our first, most immediate priority must be a lasting ceasefire followed by reconstruction. But the future must also include an honest reflection on the failures, our failures, to uphold the security net that the international community should provide to prevent such devastation. Mr. President, with the level of suffering we see, immense wisdom and courage are needed to ensure respect of international law, to overcome divisions, and to safeguard the two-state solution. We have said never again a long time ago. We must now make sure to keep our word. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Zvokic, and I give the floor to His Excellency Lord Ray Collins of Highbury, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. You have the floor.
President, the Secretary-General has highlighted the appalling situation in Gaza. The human cost on October the 7th was horrific, and since that day, hostages have endured unimaginable cruelty and Palestinians have faced relentless death and destruction. We welcome President Abbas's call for the hostages to be released, and we echo that call. We also need a return to the ceasefire to end the terrible bloodshed. We are deeply concerned by the World Food Programme's announcement on Friday that its food stocks in Gaza have run out. It is unacceptable that Israel has blocked humanitarian support from entering Gaza for nearly 2 months, meaning that Palestinian civilians, including 1 million children, are facing starvation, disease, and death. UN and other workers must be able to deliver life-saving assistance safely and in line with humanitarian principles. We are outraged by recent attacks, including the killing of Palestinian Red Crescent workers, and the hit on a UN compound on the 19th of March. Israel has admitted that this was caused by one of their tanks, despite the compound being known to the IDF as a UN humanitarian facility. This is inexcusable. We urge Israel to ensure accurate public statements on such grave incidents. It must conduct full and transparent investigations into these incidents, hold those responsible to account, and reinstate an effective deconfliction system to prevent such tragedies. President, the United Kingdom believes that lasting peace and security can only be achieved through a two-state solution. And we thank France and Saudi Arabia for their leadership in preparing for the conference in June. We should build on the Arab plan for the Gaza's future and develop credible security and governance plans acceptable to both Israel and Palestinians. Hamas must no longer govern Gaza or pose a threat to Israel, and we should build the capability of the Palestinian Authority, which will be central to a future state. Finally, we must seize the opportunity to build lasting peace across the region. There has been important progress in Lebanon, where the government has committed to crucial reforms, and in Syria, with moves towards an inclusive political transition. The United Kingdom will continue to support the Lebanese and Syrian people to build on this momentum, and we urge all parties to avoid destabilizing actions and abide by their international obligations. President, a better future in the Middle East is possible. To realize it, we must return to a ceasefire in Gaza, reinvest in efforts to achieve a two-state solution, and pursue wider normalization of relationships for the benefit of Palestinians, Israelis, and all those living in the region. I thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence.
I thank His Excellency Lord Collins for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I welcome you, Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot. Thank you to Secretary General Guterres for your briefing. Colleagues, as we have consistently said, the future of the Middle East must look different. Fresh thinking is needed to bring about a durable peace and prosperity that provides opportunities for all the region's people. Mr. President, with respect to the humanitarian needs in Gaza, no one wants to see Palestinian civilians in Gaza go hungry or thirsty. A ceasefire agreement would create the condition for the flow of humanitarian aid, but Hamas is preventing this agreement from being concluded. Just 2 weeks ago, Hamas rejected yet another proposal put forward by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt that would release hostages who have been held for 570 days and bring calm to Gaza. Instead, Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization, continues to violently suppress organic protests against its barbaric rule and demonstrate its lack of regard for the Palestinian civilians it purports to represent. Hamas bears sole responsibility for the war it unleashed on October 7, 2023, when it committed the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and abducted more than 250 hostages, as well as for the resumption of hostilities in March following Hamas's rejection of multiple proposals. The United States supports Israel in its fight to defend itself from groups that wish to destroy it. Fighting could end tomorrow if Hamas released hostages and laid down its arms. Their reckless decisions have caused enough bloodshed. Hamas must leave Gaza forever. The Council should apply pressure on Hamas to, for the first time, free Palestinians in Gaza from Hamas's tyranny. Shielding Hamas from accountability only undermines Israel's security and does nothing to improve the lives of Palestinians. Mr. President, this Council has heard firsthand testimony from Noah Argamani and Eli Sharabi, who bravely detailed the depravity they experienced at the hands of their Hamas captors. We cannot remain silent about the horrors of their plight or the urgent need to press for the release of the 59 hostages who remain in Hamas's grip, including those brutally murdered in Hamas captivity. Mr. President, President Trump has been clear. Hamas must release all the hostages immediately. 5 Americans still need to come home. Idan Alexander can still return to his parents' arms, but Hamas continues to hold the bodies of Itai Chen, Gadi Hagei, Judy Weinstein Hagei, and Omer Nutra. We will not rest until every hostage has been returned from Gaza. They will not be left behind. They will never be forgotten. We recognize the IDF's ongoing efforts to prevent civilian harm in Gaza, including its review of the tragic March 23rd incident that claimed the lives of humanitarian workers. We take note that the IDF claims 6 members of Hamas were among those killed in this incident, and call on the UN and member states to demand Hamas stop its abhorrent practice of putting civilians in harm's way. Hamas continues to cynically use civilian infrastructure to shield their personnel and weaponry. We expect all parties to comply with international humanitarian law. President, turning to the wider region, we must also recognize the insidious violence, suffering, and instability throughout the Middle East that Iran promotes through its malign actions, including its sponsorship of terrorism. Through Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and countless other terrorist proxies it backs, Iran poses a threat to the millions of people who call this region home. Iran's nuclear program, another cornerstone of its global campaign for destabilization, also threatens not only the safety of the international community, but its own citizens. President Trump has been clear. There are 2 paths for Iran to end its nuclear program. The United States prefers a negotiated resolution. Time, however, is limited. If Iran refuses to abandon its nuclear weapons program, we must hold it accountable. But real, meaningful diplomacy remains within reach. The United States will do its part to help forge a new reality alongside Israel and our Arab partners. The future must start in Gaza without Hamas. Meetings or international conferences will not change this reality. Hamas must disarm and be removed from Gaza, and the hostages must be returned home. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the representative of the United States, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank you for coming to New York to preside over this meeting. Thank you to Secretary General Guterres for your briefing. The Middle East is now deeply mired in turmoil. The tensions on the ground are worrying. Israel has reignited the war in Gaza. Its ongoing siege and relentless attacks on Gaza have resulted in new casualties among innocent civilians on a daily basis and an escalating humanitarian catastrophe. The illegal settlements in the West Bank keep expanding. Settler violence is intensifying. Israel's repeated attacks on Lebanon and Syria are violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of both countries on an ongoing basis. Since last month, tensions have been on the rise in the Red Sea. The United States has been ramping up airstrikes on Yemen in violation of Yemen's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Gaza conflict is the trigger of the current round of regional volatility. 19 months have passed, since the outbreak of the conflict, despite the unanimous and strong call from the international community for a ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. Peace remains elusive. Amid the mayhem, over 52,000 people have lost their lives. 2 million people in Gaza are threatened with forced displacement. The current round of the Gaza conflict has lasted for so long, with so much devastation. A major reason for this is the wanton violation of the basic norms underpinning international rule of law. Here, I wish to reiterate some self-evident principles. Security Council resolutions must be fully implemented. This is stipulated in the Charter of the United Nations. There is no room for distortion in interpretation. Abiding by international humanitarian law is a non-negotiable obligation and must not be used as a bargaining chip. The principles of international law are universally applicable to all countries. Double standard and selective application entail serious consequences. We urge Israel to fulfill its international legal obligations in earnest and observe the basic norms governing international relations. The United States, a country with major influence on the party concerned, should cast aside its geopolitical self-interests, uphold a fair and responsible attitude, and work to restore peace and stability in the region. Given the gravity of the situation, I wish to emphasize the following points. First, a lasting ceasefire must be secured. Violence or force cannot bring about security. A lasting ceasefire in Gaza is the best way to save lives and bring hostages home. This must be an overriding priority. China urges Israel to relinquish its obsession with the delusion of winning by force and to immediately cease its military operations in Gaza and its attacks on Lebanon and Syria. We call on the U.S. to stop its airstrikes on Yemen and to respect Yemen's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. The Houthis should stop harassing merchant ships and should maintain the safety of shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Second, humanitarian aid in Gaza must be restored. Humanitarian aid must not be weaponized. Israel must fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law as the occupying power by immediately lifting the blockade and fully restoring humanitarian access to Gaza. We strongly condemn any attacks against humanitarian workers and call for thorough investigations and accountability for all attacks. These so-called professional failures must not be used as an excuse to kill humanitarian workers. UNRWA, a body established upon a mandate of a UNGA resolution, enjoys privileges and immunities. Its dignity, safety, and security and facility should be respected and guaranteed. Third, unilateral actions that violate international law must stop. Settlement activities in the West Bank violate Security Council resolutions and must cease immediately. Security Council Resolution 2735 made it clear that, I quote, it rejects any attempt at the demographic and territorial change in the Gaza Strip. The recent expansion of the Israeli military presence in Gaza, carving out more than half of the territory into a buffer zone, is a cause for serious concern. The international community must firmly oppose any forcible displacement of the population of Gaza and any attempts to annex territory in Gaza or the West Bank. Israel should withdraw from the Lebanese and Syrian territories without delay. Fourth, the two-state solution must be revitalized. Implementing the two-state solution is the only viable way to resolve the question of Palestine. We support the Gaza Recovery and Reconstruction Plan jointly launched by Egypt and other Arab countries. We commend France and Saudi Arabia for convening the upcoming high-level conference on the two-state solution in June, and hope that the conference will inject new impetus to the implementation of the two-state solution. The international community should step up its efforts to promote the political process of the two-state solution and provide it with robust guarantees. President, as the primary organ for maintaining international peace and security, the Security Council has the responsibility to take all necessary steps towards a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. China will continue to work with the international community in an unremitting effort to end the war in Gaza, restore peace in the Middle East, and achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, I extend my gratitude to the French presidency for convening this meeting at such a critical juncture as the Palestinian people and the broader region face unprecedented challenges. Our sincere appreciation also goes to the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his briefing illuminating the devastating scale of the suffering in Gaza. We meet again amid a profound moral crisis where international resolve has diminished to mere expressions of sympathy about the catastrophe unfolding before our eyes. The statistics speak volumes. In 18 months, over 50,000 Palestinians killed, more than 100,000 wounded in these relentless atrocities. Occupied Palestinian territory situation is rapidly deteriorating beyond our darkest fears. The systematic deprivation of millions of Gazans is evident in the World Food Programme depleted stocks and acute shortages of medicine, fuel, and clean water. Most devastating of all is UNRWA, the sole lifeline sustaining Palestinian refugees for more than 7 decades, has been systematically dismantled, leaving an unprecedented void in humanitarian assistance. For over 50 days, Gaza has been transformed into an open-air prison where survival itself has become a daily struggle. The deliberate targeting of medical facilities, obstruction of aid, and forced starvation of civilians constitute crimes against humanity that demand immediate action. More alarming still is the forced displacement of 2 million Palestinians, 90% of Gaza's population, while 20,000 new settlement units rise in the occupied West Bank, revealing a calculated strategy to permanently alter Palestinian demographics. Mr. President, in response to these developments, my delegation proposes the following points. An immediate and permanent ceasefire must take effect. While we acknowledge the promising negotiations in Cairo, we emphasize that dialogue must yield tangible results. Humanitarian access to Gaza must flow without restriction. We cannot observe passively as basic survival becomes a luxury for an entire population. Protection mechanisms for civilian infrastructure, particularly hospitals, schools, and religious sites, must be established and enforced. The International Court of Justice ruling must be implemented, ensuring accountability through international justice mechanism. Mr. President, Somalia stands firmly behind the Arab Islamic plan for Gaza's early recovery and reconstruction. We view the upcoming high-level international conference co-chaired by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as vital to implementing a viable two-state solution. We advocate for Palestine's full membership in the United Nations as a recognition of a long-denied fundamental right and the only path aligned with international law and UN resolutions. Yet this solution grows more distant with each day of occupation, each new settlement, each demolished home. Mr. President, beyond Palestine, we are concerned about Israel's continued aggression in Lebanon and its violation of its sovereignty, including airstrikes and presence in the authorized buffer zone. We call for immediate Israeli withdrawal from the Lebanese territory and uphold its obligation under UN Security Council Resolution 1701 of 2006. In Syria, we denounce the repeated Israeli airstrikes on civilian infrastructure, airport and airstrips. These actions not only violate international law, but breached the 1974 disengagement of force agreement between Israel and Syria, threatening regional stability. In conclusion, Mr. President, our delegation reiterates its unwavering position. We must revitalize the political track towards a comprehensive peace, recognizing the state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital as the only viable path forward. The choice before this Council is stark. We can either perpetuate a cycle of crisis management, or we can summon the political courage to pursue a lasting and just solution. The stability of our region and the credibility of this Council depends on it. Somalia stands ready to support all genuine efforts toward this end. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Somalia. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you for being with us today to attend this very important debate that you're presiding over.
Peace cannot be achieved through violence. It can only be attained through understanding and negotiations. Yet, a political understanding of the Palestinian question remains elusive, as we are only 1 month away from the upcoming June conference and the prospects of a ceasefire deal are still unclear. The June conference presents a unique opportunity to revitalize the political process and pave the way towards the implementation of the two-state solution according to the relevant Security Council resolutions, while recognizing the right of Israel to exist side by side with the Palestinians in peace. We support the efforts by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and sincerely thank them for their work and their leadership in promoting a sustainable day after for the region. Having said that, we cannot but stress the importance for the fruition of the negotiations